Hello there, thanks for tuning in to our favorite news destination. You're watching In Your Interest with me, Kabir Naqvi. Before we get into the focus segments, we've got two essential debates for you. One about a hike that doesn't touch your cylinder, but it will still hit your pocket. And secondly, a war that hasn't ended, but per se, just been cleverly paused, and how that's actually affecting you. But before that, the top headlines we're tracking for you. Commercial LPG cylinders and the prices have been increased by nearly 1,000 rupees, 993 to be precise. The third price hike since February. We're going to be decoding the impact of that, the inflationary psychology. Tune in. The Election Commission announces repolling for 15 polling booths in West Bengal, declares voting in these booths as void, voting to take place from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. on the 2nd of May, that's tomorrow. Meanwhile, in Punjab, the Aam Aadmi Party government wins the confidence motion in the Punjab Assembly amid allegations of coming to the Assembly in an inebriated state. Of course, talking about the Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann. Confidence motion, meanwhile, was boycotted by the opposition. UPI, the payments platform, completes 10 years since its launch, emerges as the world's largest real-time payment platform. Tehran sends its latest proposal for negotiations with the United States via its Pakistani mediators. We're going to be decoding this as part of our second debate. Don't go anywhere. And even as we're talking about that, the United States reportedly sends 6,500-ton munitions to Israel within 24 hours, fueling speculation about the possibility of escalation of conflict with Iran. The fuel price tsunami. This is not just about cylinders or your aviation turbine fuel. It's about how global crises are slowly entering the Indian household without ever knocking on the door. Your kitchen may be safe at the moment, but your wallet outside the house is already feeling the heat. Because we're tracking a major economic development that is it's set to hit both your plate and your travel plans. Take a look at this. Global tensions in West Asia have finally knocked on India's door, leading to a massive spike in energy prices. Oil companies have sharply increased the price of commercial 19-kilogram LPG cylinders by 993 rupees in one go. In the national capital, the price has jumped from 2,078.5 rupees to 3,071.5 rupees. Similar big increases have been seen in Mumbai, Kolkata and Chennai. In the last few months, commercial LPG has become nearly 1,500 rupees more expensive. Even the 5-kilogram free trade LPG cylinder has gone up by 261 rupees. Now, at the same time, the price of aviation turbine fuel, or ATF, has also risen sharply. Domestic ATF has increased between 8.5 to 25%, whilst international prices have crossed the 2 lakh rupee per kiloliter in some of those cases. The government has put a cap on how much of this increase can be passed on to domestic airlines to prevent a sudden spike in those airfares. But whilst domestic 14.2 kg LPG cylinders used by households remain unchanged, still at the 930 rupee mark, protecting 33 crore families, the sharp rise in the commercial LPG, the 19 kg unit, is already being felt across the economy. Hotels, your dhabas, the street vendors are facing higher cooking costs. Many have already started increasing their prices. This is pushing up the food prices and adding pressure on food inflation. The unorganized sector and small businesses are finding it difficult to absorb these costs. Most of them are passing the burden on to the customers, and this ripple effect is slowly reaching the common man through higher costs of let's say, eating out, of aviation, travel, and needless to say, daily expenses. Taking a look at the aviation sector, the ATF makes up 40 to 60% of an airline's total cost. Even with the government's partial cap, airlines are under severe stress. Some have already introduced fuel surcharges, and airfares on several routes have gone up. This could affect tourism. We're talking about jobs linked to the travel industry. And the government says it has shielded households and the household fuels and limited the hike only to commercial users who are linked to global prices. It says oil marketing companies are absorbing some losses and steps have been taken to control the spillover. However, the opposition, and here's where the politics comes in, is attacking the government strongly. They have called the Prime Minister the inflation man and say these hikes are coming at a time when people are already struggling. They argue that the sharp rise in commercial LPG is like an extortion on small businesses and will ultimately hurt the common citizen through higher food prices and the cost of living. An esteemed set of panelists with us on the broadcast. I'm going to be introducing them in just a short while. The big questions that we're trying to understand. The government has shielded 33 crore households by freezing domestic LPG prices, but how will it stop the ripple effect of 1,000 rupee hike in commercial gas from driving up the price of every meal sold outside of the home? So many of us depend on that. And with fuel accounting for up to 60% of airline operating costs, is a government-mandated price cap on ATF, the turbine fuel, enough to save the industry, or are we simply delaying an inevitable and massive hike in airfares? And finally, as West Asia remains volatile, is India's strategy of having oil marketing companies absorb losses sustainable? Or are we looking at a much larger price correction in petrol and diesel that's just around the corner? Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador to WTO, many thanks for taking out the time, sir. Mitali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates, with us on the broadcast, and Mr. Dilip Chinoy, former Secretary General, FICCI, with us on the broadcast as well. Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta, let's get the snowball rolling here. Commercial LPG prices jumped nearly 1,000 rupees in one go, driven, of course, by the West Asian tensions and disruptions around the Strait of Hormuz. We've discussed this threadbare and so many times. How much of this is purely global pressure, and how much of this is domestic policy? What's your assessment and reading with the price hike today? India has tried to shield domestic consumers whilst passing on the cost to commercial users. Is this a sustainable strategy, or are we just delaying the impact? Sir?
I think this price pass on is in keeping with the price which the government run oil companies are paying in actual terms. So I think the aim is that the increased prices of gas should not be borne by the government, but should be passed on to the consumers. As far as household gas is concerned, the prices have also gone up. Inevitably, they are in fact the same as in the case of commercial LPG, and it is being subsidized, and the extent of subsidy would be about, it has been calculated, would be about 80,000 crores per annum extra. So that is a huge burden which is going to be borne by the government if it keeps the price on the domestic LPG at the same level. So I think there could be a consideration when part of the price rise could be passed on to the consumers as well. But that is something for the future. It's not going to take place immediately by my reckoning. As far as the other issues are concerned, about oil, petrol and diesel, it has been calculated that at the current rates of, let's say, $100 per barrel, though the price, I think, of Brent crude is about $120 per barrel now, it has been calculated that the subsidy amount is about 14 rupees per litre of petrol and 18 rupees per litre of diesel. And the burden is going to come to about 27,000 crores on the oil refiners, government-run oil refiners, which account for about 90% of the fuel supplied in the country. So 20,000 crores is going to be the burden. Now, in 2022, because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, prices of crude had gone up. Of course, India was, it was protected to a great extent from the oil price rise in the international market by getting discounted Russian oil. So at that point of time, the prices of oil in the domestic sector had gone up, and and even when the Russian crude was our mainstay and accounted for a sizable chunk of our imports, the prices continued to remain at the same high level. So a reserve of more than 3 lakh crores has been built up by the nationalized oil refiners in India. So even if we calculate that this 27,000 crores would be the net outgo in terms of the subsidy absorption, there would be a few months leeway which would be in the hands of the government and the nationalized oil refiners to take this shock. But should it continue beyond, let's say, the next 6 months or so, I think it will have to be passed on.
All right, sir, because given the volatility of the West Asian war sector right now, you're talking about it could be passed on. There is a little bit of elbow space with the government, but should we be preparing for a prolonged period of energy-linked inflation? It had sort of gone down, but now Mr. Trump seems to have other plans. About 6,500 tons of munitions already given to Israel, even as this ceasefire holds and the War Acts, the War Powers Act, very cleverly being paused as well. Should we be prepared for a prolonged period of energy-linked inflation?
Yes, I think, Barclays has calculated about a month or so ago. Three scenarios: $100 per barrel, $150 per barrel, and $70 per barrel. At $100 per barrel, it was calculated that inflation would go up by about 0.6%, and it would affect the GDP by bringing it down by 0.5%, and our current account deficit would go up by about 0.8%, putting pressure on the fundamentals, and this would have a huge impact on inflation. And considering this scenario projections, in the Q3 or Q4, we would perhaps have to go in for a rate increase in the bank rates, which would have again, impact an impact on the economy, on growth, particularly.
All right. I'm going to circle back to you, Ambassador. Do stay on with us. Mitali, let's come to the impact on the common man out there. Even though domestic LPG prices haven't really changed, we're already seeing restaurants hike prices by 20%, beverages going up by 25%, roadside dosa and tea stalls, they're becoming costlier. How significant really is this indirect inflation going to be hitting the common man? Last time I was speaking to you, you were, traveling, you had stopped by at a roadside dhaba and the prices had gone up over there as well. Essentially, for a large section of urban India, daily wagers, students, the office goers, sometimes me as well, affordable outside food is a necessity. It's not a luxury. Are they the worst hit in this situation?
So thanks a lot for having me on this discussion. I think it's a very, very complex situation because very honestly, when we are talking, and we are at Nikkor Associates, we've been talking to a number of industry groups. MSMEs are honestly amongst the worst to be impacted because it's not only the restaurants and dhabas anymore, In the first month of this crisis, it was the restaurants and dhabas that were immediately hit because they couldn't actually adapt. Now what we're seeing is the restaurants, at least the mid-level restaurants, have actually gone ahead and invested in alternative modes of cooking, like induction cook stoves. They've permanently changed their menus, many of them. Of course, the ones who are on the roadsides, for them, it's much harder, but at least the ones which are at mid-level, they have actually gone ahead and made these investments. But the sectors that are getting hit the most are sectors like chemicals, pharmaceuticals, electronics, all of these sectors where you have MSME suppliers to larger enterprises, especially export-oriented enterprises, they are the ones who are badly hit because they are not able to secure supplies of industrial gases. They're not able to, secure the commercial LPG cylinders. They're not able to secure even, certainty in their orders. So as a result, on the input side as well as on the revenue side, they are being hit from both sides. On top of that, sectors like textiles, manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing are being hit because a number of people, who are the labor actually doing the manufacturing. Now, when their cost of living goes up, what's the reaction? The reaction is we're going back to our villages. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing trends of reverse migration starting to increase across major Indian cities. And people going back to rural areas to say, look, we'll come back to the city when this all gets sorted out. And that's creating a situation for MSMEs being, losing out on their labor. So honestly, for MSMEs across sectors, but particularly these 4 or 5 sectors that I've just mentioned, it is a very, very difficult scenario. It's a scenario of survival, and what they really need in a time like this is working capital support, just the way it was given during COVID-19. If we all remember the package, that was given from the government side, a lot of people are talking about reducing taxes. I'm actually not in favor of tax reductions. I do feel that the government has already made an exception with the excise tax reduction. But supporting the groups that are suffering, like MSMEs, that is really an intervention that is required. And, providing working capital support is something that is required.
More support to the MSMEs. Many thanks for your opening submission. I'm going to come back to you as well. Mr. Chenoy, many thanks for patiently waiting. Let's throw some light on the ATF front as well. Of course, 993 rupee jump in commercial LPG is massive. Is it purely global LPG benchmarks, or are there supply side constraints as well? Is something that the ambassador has helped us understand. But we now have a widening gap, isn't it, Mr. Chenoy? You've got domestic LPG that is protected, but commercial LPG cylinders that are at records high. Is this particular gap sustainable? And whilst you're at it, the ATF front, even with partial government intervention, how serious is this issue? Airlines are warning of stress, possible flight cuts, rising fares.
No, thank you, Kabir. And if I just take what Ambassador Dasgupta and Mithali actually said just now, I think it's important to understand that this is not a pricing issue. Pricing is an after effect, right? It is fundamentally an energy security issue. We import 85% of our crude oil, 50+% of our natural gas requirements, significant LPG requirements. Now, if there's a shortage, right, you have to ensure that the most vulnerable sectors actually get it. So, there was a reference to COVID, and when you looked at COVID, even there, the benefits or the outreach was structured first in the very, very poor. So we had the food and the ration going, and then, the domestics, then the MSME, then large industries. So it was actually structured that way. And if you see what's actually happening now, they're doing the same thing.
So it's the same playbook at play.
Same playbook at play. One significant difference, and that's very important to understand in this time, the issue with airlines and, fuel prices was not there because of the lockdown, right? Now we don't have a lockdown, right? So the demand is there, but there's a supply side shock, right? And as Ambassador Dasgupta has said, that depending on whether it's 3 to 6 months, how long this supply side shock remains, and the energy, the energy prices are increasing because of the supply side shock. Because a lot of the oil, even after if we unblock the Strait of Hormuz and we have everything traveling, yet there is a significant amount in different countries of, petroleum producing capacity which has gone off, and that's again going to be a demand supply mismatch. So I think this is important in this sense. But, domestic LPG prices are politically moderated and very often partially insulated by government intervention and subsidy. But that means the subsidy burden is also going up. That means the fiscal deficit is also going up.
80,000 crore rupees subsidy by the government. I mean, that's what the ambassador told us in his opening submission.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the first few months of this year, we spent close to, 100,000 crores just on increased fuel prices, right?
Exactly.
And at that time, the fuel prices were not increased. Neither commercial LPG nor turbine fuel. So, you've actually absorbed that, but there's a limit to what it can be absorbed. And therefore, you have to find sectors and, areas of the population where you got to pass these increases on.
Yeah, so just to dwell a little bit deeper on that, oil companies, like you mentioned also, are often said to absorb some of this burden, but realistically, could you paint a picture for the viewers? How much are they truly absorbing and how much is going to be passed on?
At this point of time for domestic fuel and given the excise duty cut, right, the government is absorbing the excise duty cut and the petroleum companies are losing, close to, three-digit, let's say 100 rupees or something per liter, depending on which way, the price is. And since we have only a limited amount of
Take a look at that, Mr. Chinoy. We're breaking this news even as we speak. Petrol, diesel price hike has not been ruled out. These are sources telling us at this point in time. This is coming, of course, from the government sources. Petrol, diesel price hike not ruled out. And oil firms, the losses are mounting for them. Pricing review is likely. This is what sources are telling us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes sense, right? So, what is the larger picture that we want to travel? Do you want to keep the fisc in place? Do you want to keep our macroeconomic fundamentals in place so we continue to attract, investment, continue to grow, or we, pass on subsidies and create a unmanageable subsidy burden and creating other implications? So it's a very tightrope walk, and it's all supply side driven. And there are short-term measures that we need to take, but we need long-term measures. We are amongst, if you look at the countries like China, South Korea, and some other countries, they have, 3 to 4 times the number of days of strategic oil reserves than we have, right? We need to, Mithali was talking of people going to electric, induction stoves and all. We need to expand rural.
Precisely.
So we got to do a lot of stuff.
But the scale and timing, and this is the right time, this is the right segue for me to, bring those global examples as well. Because Ambassador, I was just going to ask you, we're looking at temporary spike. If commercial sectors keep absorbing these shocks, it's definitely going to distort pricing and hurt the small businesses, the MSMEs, just like Mithali was telling us. But can you help the viewers with some global examples? Other economies, they're facing similar global fuel shocks. Some examples mentioned by Mr. Chinoy. But do they distribute the burden differently compared to how we're being selective in our shielding, in our approach?
In the Western economies, the government does not absorb the shock of oil price rise. In the US, for instance, it has gone up to more than $4. And I think last I heard it was selling for about $4.30. So in the Western economies, this concept of subsidization for the general public is not there. But the affected groups, especially the low-income groups, if they need some help, that could be extended if it is likely to last for long. That is the attitude taken by the West. But of course, in India, it is a different story altogether. In India, if we increase the price of diesel, a lot of, railways possibly carry only about 20% of our freight. Most of it is carried by trucks, which are diesel driven. So if we increase the cost of diesel, there is an immediate impact on inflation. And that is why for $100 a barrel, the inflation is, projected to go up by 0.6%, the CPI, which is quite high because we have brought it down to below 4%. And if it goes up by this extent, it would be have a very significant impact. The other point which Mithali pointed out is that with the increase in prices, all of a sudden 900 odd rupees per cylinder of commercial gas, there are many migrant workers who do not have their own cooking arrangements.
Yep.
They rely on the dhabas or some commercial. So they would be under pressure to go back to their villages. And even if they have a commercial an LPG domestic connection, which most of them don't have, there would be a pressure because the period during which they can get the second cylinder is getting extended. So it is already visible in many places where the migrant labor have been living with their families, and even when they are living alone, it is it is affecting their decisions. So it will have an overall impact. The problem is that if we pass on the price rise to the common public, and the lower sections get hit worse than the other sections which can absorb the price rise, that will have a very bad impact.
A cascading effect, if I could put it that way.
Because the numbers of the poor are much more.
Yeah.
So that is what we have to guard against.
I think that's what Mithali was also talking about, and I think Mr. Chinoy also pointed towards that. The intervention from the government has to be to come and safeguard that very strata of society. And Mithali, at that point in time, this kind of inflation doesn't always show up immediately on, let's say, headline CPI. Is there a gap between official inflation data and what people are actually going to be feeling, let's say, starting next week? And are we looking at a temporary spike, or is this the new normal, given the last 60 days, what we've seen? If global prices remain high, what should the common consumer realistically be bracing for? Let's put a time period of, let's say, the next 45 days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I completely agree with, with Sir and also with Mr. Chinoy. See, very honestly, this is not the time for us now, as, sitting in the Indian economy, to be thinking about short-term crisis management only. Of course, there is a section of the government which is entirely dedicated to managing this crisis. And, they are doing a number of activities. They are managing to say, okay, how long can we stave off this price rise? How long can we, manage the price rise only through a rise in fuel prices? How long can we, provide support to the sections that need it the most? But there has to be now a very deep introspection to ask, how long are we going to be so energy vulnerable? And how can we chart out a path towards energy independence, which does not involve us constantly, managing the geopolitical tensions that are beyond our control? Because very honestly, here we have one president of one country that has thrown the people who are below the poverty line of the entire global south.
The entire world is paying for their misadventures, and we're still reeling with that impact. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. Without a care in the world, without even a thought towards the plight of the poor. So very honestly, we cannot continue to live like this. We cannot continue to be dependent on just global supply chains. We have to now invest in our own energy independence. So if that means, taking out loans from international organizations and investing in our renewable energy capacity, we must do it. If that means, going ahead and mobilizing private capital through guarantee instruments and risk mitigation instruments to come and invest in solar energy supplies, we must do it. If that means that we need to put in more funds into R&D towards energy independence, we must do it. So, this is the time where we have to galvanize renewable energy marketplaces to start working for us and to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels entirely. Even the proposal of the 85% ethanol blending needs to be taken seriously. Even the point around dimethyl ether needs to be taken seriously. It's come from CSIR Pune. So, why are we not hearing? We should be hearing and doing more on these aspects.
Well, quite true. Pertinent points that you've placed on the table there. Mr. Chinoy, the final word goes to you. Running out of time here, but please do help the viewers understand. If the West Asian tensions escalate further, are we looking at another round of hikes in both LPG, the ATF? Would you be surprised if that happens? Do alternatives like PNG and electric cooking, like you mentioned earlier, realistically offer relief? And we're specifically talking about the small businesses. And, we've painted a very pragmatic picture, but let's also talk about the worst scenarios. What's the worst case scenario here, both for fuel prices and for the common consumer out there?
So I think, everyone, we all talked about how to manage the energy crisis by, diversifying, etc. But if you look at, and you asked this question earlier about what are international or what are other countries doing. So if you look at Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, or Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines, right? they're doing the same playbook as India, but they've done two significant things that is different and which we have not yet looked at. So each of these economies is actually reducing demand by saying work from home policy, then improving productivity, putting energy conservation measures, increasing energy efficiency. So they are actually working on how, not only how to manage the subsidy and go to the vulnerable sectors, but also how to reduce consumption. So the fiscal burden on them is actually in the short term is declining. So that's one very significant thing that is happening here. But again, if this continues, right, we have to think of some of the measures that Mithali talked about. And I think it's now time that we accelerated electric vehicle, adoption in India, accelerated, expand the PLI scheme, get many more players into this, so that we have a variety of things going forward rather than subsidizing fuel, subsidize the other things which actually remove our dependence from imported petroleum products. So we got to think of demand side management as well, in addition to supply side management, and then protecting vulnerable sections of society. Very interesting thing, commercial LPG is also used to feed workers who work in factories.
Yeah.
And if that's going to impact, then that's going to again add costs there. And maybe we need to think of incentivizing industrial kitchens that are working on alternate fuel to be able to supply cooked meals to others, so we kind of address the reverse migration going forward. A lot of this was done in COVID. I mean, the playbook is there. We just got to put on our thinking hats and execution hats.
Yeah, everybody seems to be a little bit in denial, and of course the society is so huge and large as well. It's how do you literally disseminate this to the larger multitude out there? That's going to be an uphill task as well. The cascading effects are far too real, just like the ambassador also pointed out. I think we've run out of time here, but I wish we had more time to discuss all of this. We're seeing 20 rupee meals now turn into 25. The flights are becoming costlier and services are inching up, and that begs the question, is this inflation delayed rather than being avoided? Many thanks, Mithali, for helping us out with your insights. That panel on Sheconomy was really amazing and really riveting. Ambassador, always a pleasure to have you with us, your expertise. And Mr. Chinoy, many thanks for your insights as well. Well, you see, the cylinder at home may not have changed, but the cost of living clearly has. And the question that remains, how long before this indirect pain becomes a direct burden on every Indian household, and what does the future have in store for us? A lot of acceleration that is needed, but we do need to stop putting this issue under the carpet and really start thinking about it's not a pricing issue, like Mr. Chinoy pointed out. This is an energy vulnerability issue. We're going to slip into a quick commercial breather here. On the other side, the West Asian war and updates from there, because of which we're feeling this pinch in our pocket here back at home.
बेबो का एक ही रूल, रोज खाओ अंडे विदाउट भूल।
Cause eggs are cool, cool, cool. Yes, eggs are cool, cool, cool. Summer में एनर्जी हो जाती है कम, खाओ अंडे एनर्जेटिक रहो हरदम। Strength और power मिले हर रोज with proteins and minerals का daily dose। Eggs are cool, cool, cool. Yes, eggs are cool, cool, cool. Yes, eggs are cool, cool, cool.
संडे हो या मंडे, रोज खाओ अंडे।
Water overflowing, what could it be?